What up everybody? Welcome to Tutorial Tuesday. Today we're going to be going over chopping drums and learning how to edit them so they can sound nice. Obviously it's easy to go through a drum kit and find individual drum sounds that can sound good, but personally what I've been doing recently is finding drum loops and then chopping out the individual drum sounds to put together my own patterns with it. Now the reason for doing this is when you go through a drum kit you can definitely find a lot of good sounds, but sometimes those sounds just don't really mesh well together. If you pull the kick, the snare, and the hi-hat all from the same drum, they have a little bit of cohesion and sound a little bit better together. Now the issue with pulling out individual drum sounds is sometimes they just don't sound good, or they sound flat, or they got too much reverb in them and too many vibrations. There's a lot of editing that goes on to make them sound good, make them actually slap. So we're going to go through that today and show you exactly how to do it on your own. Alright, so step one is find a drum loop. I got these Tyler, the Creator drum breaks. Alright, so I'm going to open up an Edison. I'm going to take this drum break and just drag it in. One method for using drum loops is just selecting the loop. And then taking this loop and just dragging it onto the channel rack or the playlist and just letting it play through. And then trying to find chords or samples to match it. But then with this, you can't really match the tempo, you can't really edit the drums around, so I want to take out the individual drum sounds. So if we pop back into Edison, I'm going to go to zero crossing. So yeah, I'm just going to take this red selector tool and select the first kick right here. And I'm going to hit this arrow down here so it doesn't scroll with it. Open up the channel rack, and then just drag that on there. And here's a hi-hat. I'm going to take this and drag it on there as well. Snare right here. That's all we need for right now. So I'm going to delete all these other drums that FL puts in there at first, just to focus on what we got going on. Then I'm going to take each of these and send them to their own channel. Let's focus on this kick first. Alright, so first off, the kick sounds a little flat. So the first thing that you want to do is click this normalize button right here. That'll help raise the volume, especially if you're using a drum loop that sounds good but it's really quiet. The normalize button will just help put it back to a more workable sound that'll actually slap. Now with the kick drum and with a lot of the drums in general, they have a lot of extra reverb on them that won't mesh well together sometimes. What I like to do is shorten the length by just flipping this out knob right here. So you can still hear a little bit of the reverb and echo on it, but it's a little bit shorter and condensed. When I'm changing the tempos of songs, it'll make it easier for the drums to fit in and actually sound better. Now, with this kick, you still have the kick sound, but if you listen closely, you can also hear a hi-hat on top of it as well. Now, this particular hi-hat isn't too bad, but let's say you didn't want to hear that hi-hat sound with the drum at all, because you're probably going to add in another hi-hat later anyway. So it's on channel 1 right now. Let's make sure we got channel 1 selected here. All you need to do is go ahead and open up an EQ. And I like to do the hard cut, then make it a little bit softer. Then just bring the EQ down. And you don't hear the hi-hat anymore. Now, if you like to have a little texture with the hi-hat in there, obviously, you can feel free to bring it up a little bit too. And then a lot of times, these organic drums, they have a lot of stuff in the sub bass that you don't really hear. Kind of drains energy from the kick to make it hit harder. So you can just go ahead and take out some of that sub bass. And obviously edit it till it sounds the way that you'd want it to sound. At this point, if you go too far with the low end, you'll actually lose some of the bass and the thump from the kick that you want. So it's definitely a balancing act when it comes to actually mixing the drum properly. Next, we got the hi-hat. Come in here and click on normalize. Now, typically with hi-hats, they're going to be way too loud when you normalize it, but that's better than being way too soft if you don't normalize it. So I always recommend on just mixing the hi-hat a little bit lower. Also, when we have this hi-hat hit, definitely has an extra reverb and noise on it. So again, just take this out knob, shorten it up a little bit. Makes it a nice tighter hitting hi-hat for you. We got it on our channel rack at number 2. Again, we're going to open up an EQ. When you take a hi-hat from a drum loop like that, there's still going to be reverb from the low end of the kick drum and the snare that clashes with it. So this time we want to edit out the low end of the hi-hat. This will help make the hi-hat and the kick stand out better because they won't be clashing with frequencies. Also, I like to take off a little bit of the high end sometimes. Again, there's just vibrations and frequencies going to a part where the human ear can't really hear it. If you have those frequencies, it'll kind of drain energy from the sound and the mix. So it's better just kind of take out the stuff that you can't even really hear anyway. Be careful with that though. Don't go too overboard. Next up, we'll work on the snare. I always love the snares from organic drum kits that just have so much more character than just some bland snare that you have from a drum kit. Again, hit normalize, and let's take off some of this reverb. And then we'll go to the EQ one more time. With snares, I typically leave on most of the high end, and I try to just hone in on where the major hit is at on the frequency spectrum. Look like it's mostly hitting around this 200 right here, so I give it some extra room just to get a little bit of bass in it, but not too much. By removing some of the low end here, again, it'll help the kick stand out in the mix better. I'll take off a little bit of the high end. Just get rid of some of the frequencies that you don't really hear. Also, sometimes with snares and hi-hats, just having that high pinging frequency sound can get really annoying, especially through a whole track. So sometimes I'll just roll off the high end just so it's easier on the ears. Now, the best thing about doing it this way is that you're not constrained by the tempo of the drum loop. I can change the tempo on this track and the drums will still match up with it. Now, usually that alone will help make your drums sound a million times better. But again, even sometimes the drums don't hit hard enough. They might have a very interesting texture to them and they sound great, but you still want a little bit more punch with them. So the one thing I do to help make the drum sounds hit a little bit better is what's called parallel processing. It's basically a version of compression, but just done the opposite way. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make a bus. I'm going to take the channel that the kick is on, and I'm going to route it to its own track. Route to this track only. And all I had to do to bring up that menu is just right click. Now on the second one, instead of doing route to this track only, I'm going to do just route to this track. So now we got two separate areas where the kick's coming in. Now I'm going to go to this first one, and I'm going to send it to another channel. So I'm going to right click, route to this track only, and again with the other one that I did, same thing. Route to this track only. We split it into two separate channels, and then we brought it back to one again. This is called a bus. Now on the first copy that I made of this, I'm going to open up a limiter. I'm not going to do anything to it. On the second one, I'm going to open up a limiter. And on this second one, we're going to compress the crap out of the second hit. So if you're on limit, go to the compression option. I'm going to bring this threshold down to a spot kind of where you see it start to dip. I'm going to take this ratio and pretty much crank it down to something extreme, like 20. So what's happening now, we have this first drum here that has all the transients and all the texture of the drum. And then we have the second one. It's all compressed down. It doesn't have all the transients and the dynamic range as the original sample, but it has the meat and the punch of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the original one. And I'm going to try to get both of those to match up so they're about the same level. That way you have one version with just the original organic sound and the other one that's compressed to heck to make this final one here in this last channel. And then you can mix it however you need it to sound. Obviously, you can adjust the amount of compression that you put on the second channel. And of course, you can adjust the levels on how you want it to sound as well. But again, the theory behind it is it just adds a second channel with all the meat in it to get it there to make it actually punch and cut through the track so it still stands out without just raising the knob on the kick and having it drowning out the rest of the sound. So you get that punch without drowning out the rest of the songs in your track. You can also do the same thing with the snare. You can do it with the hi-hat. Not typically needed with a hi-hat because usually the hi-hat is going to be lower and kind of in the background of the mix anyway. If you ever want your kick and your snare to get a little more punch to them, parallel processing is the way to go in my opinion. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Obviously by sending each drum hit to its own individual track, you can put whatever individual effects you want on each drum hit as well. You don't have to put the exact same amount of reverb or delay or whatever else you want to put on your drums for that. If you do a drum loop, then you just got to put it on the whole thing. And the loop itself just makes it a little bit harder to edit. Sometimes you can find a drum loop and that'll sit right on top of that sample absolutely perfect. It'll be mixed well, it'll be on time, and that's great. But if you got a sample you're working with or you got some melodies and you like the drum sounds and the loop just doesn't match with the tempo and everything like that, slicing out the individual drum sounds and editing that way will still be able to get you the feel of the drum loop, but it'll give you a lot more control in actually editing the drum sounds themselves. So that's pretty much all I got for this episode. If you got any questions about anything, definitely leave them in the comments. And if you got any other tips for me, I'm still learning as well. Feel free to drop that knowledge too. Hopefully that was helpful. Y'all have a good one.